The courtroom smelled faintly of old wood and disinfectant, the kind of place where justice was supposed to feel sacred, but often felt routine. People shuffled in their seats, waiting for the next case to be called. It was nothing more than a minor traffic violation on the docket. But the man standing before the bench carried himself with an air that didn't belong to petty infractions. He was elderly, his back a little stooped with the years, his hair silvered and thin. In his hand, neatly pressed against his chest, he held a veteran's cap. The brim was worn, the insignia faded, but there was a kind of pride in the way he clutched it, as if it were the only thing that still connected him to a world long past. He didn't speak. He didn't fidget. He simply stood, eyes lowered, his silence steady as stone. The judge, a man in his late 50s with slicked-back hair and a voice trained to command, peered down at him with thinly veiled irritation. Judge Halford was known in this county for his sharp tongue and even sharper ego. To him, silence wasn't humility. It was defiance. And defiance was something he never tolerated in his courtroom. "Name?" The judge barked. The veteran answered quietly, his voice gravelly from age. "Robert Hayes, Your Honor." "Robert Hayes," the judge repeated mockingly, dragging the syllables as though the name itself annoyed him. "Charged with failure to yield at an intersection, causing obstruction of traffic. And yet," he leaned forward, his voice dripping with disdain, "you stand here like the law doesn't apply to you. Head down, lips shut. Do you think ignoring me will make this go away?" Hayes didn't respond. His hands tightened slightly around the cap he held, but his eyes remained lowered. The spectators shifted in their seats. A few glanced at each other uneasily. Everyone in town knew the old man was a veteran. They'd seen him at parades, sometimes walking alone, his chest carrying a modest set of medals. But Judge Halford wasn't a man who cared for parades or stories of the past. "Cat got your tongue, Mr. Hayes?" the judge pressed, smirking. "Or are you too important to answer the questions of this court? You wear that cap like it means something. Like the rest of us should bow down because you once played soldier." The words struck like a slap in the air. A woman in the back row gasped softly, while the bailiff shifted uncomfortably, his eyes flickering between the judge and the veteran. Hayes finally raised his gaze, not high, just enough to acknowledge the insult. His eyes were pale blue, tired yet unflinching, but he still said nothing. That silence enraged the judge. He slammed his gavel once. "Answer me! Do you think your so-called service gives you the right to break the law? You've lived too long in your glory days, old man. In this room, I am the authority. Not you, not your medals, and certainly not your silence." The veteran inhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, as if steadying himself. His lips parted slightly, but no words came out. "Coward," the judge spat finally, leaning back in his chair with satisfaction. "That's all you are. A coward hiding behind your silence, pretending you're something you're not." The word hung in the air like a foul stench. The courtroom went still. Even the ceiling fan seemed to hum softer. Robert Hayes didn't flinch. He didn't argue. He simply bowed his head once more, holding his cap a little tighter, his silence speaking louder than any defense could. And though the spectators couldn't understand it yet, they felt it, that this moment was heavier than a traffic violation. Something deeper was unfolding, something the judge had no idea he was about to awaken. The courtroom had fallen into a tense hush. Even the faint scratching of pens on paper seemed loud, almost intrusive. Judge Halford, confident in his authority, leaned forward, ready to land another verbal blow. He saw an old man who wouldn't speak and mistook it for weakness, a silent challenge to his power. "You think I'm intimidated by your quiet dignity, Mr. Hayes?" The judge sneered, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think I care about medals, parades, or old war stories? You're nothing here, a relic of some forgotten era standing in my courtroom pretending you are above the law." The veteran's lips twitched slightly, but he made no move to respond. He inhaled steadily, exhaling in a controlled rhythm that betrayed years of discipline. It was a rhythm that had carried him through long nights on foreign soil, through missions where a single misstep could mean death. This man had faced judgment far heavier than a gavel. He had faced judgment under fire with the lives of others in his hands. The judge's voice rose. "Answer me! Do you think your service makes you untouchable? You think your medals give you the right to ignore basic traffic laws?" Hayes remained calm, his eyes fixed not on the judge, but on some invisible point in the room. He had no need to shout. The courtroom had already begun to sense the weight of his presence, quiet, deliberate, and unwavering. There was an air about him, a subtle authority that could not be commanded, only recognized. Then, ever so softly, Hayes leaned just a little forward. His voice was barely audible, a whisper meant for no one but the judge himself. 2 words left his lips, each one carefully measured, each one carrying decades of history, courage, and sacrifice. A call sign. The judge froze mid-sentence. His gavel, clutched tightly in one hand, wavered. Something in those 2 words struck him deep, piercing the armor of arrogance he wore so comfortably. His eyes widened as memories, long suppressed, flickered behind his pupils. He knew that call sign. He knew what it represented. A classified mission, a feat of courage that had been whispered only in the highest military circles, a mission where failure meant certain death. The veteran, seemingly frail and ordinary, was not ordinary at all. The weight of what he had done, the lives he had saved, the chaos he had survived, it all hung in those 2 whispered syllables. And suddenly, the entire courtroom could feel it. A subtle shift swept through the room. The bailiff straightened. The stenographer paused mid-keystroke, and the spectators leaned forward, sensing an invisible current of awe. Even the judge, the man who thought himself untouchable, felt the gravity press down on him. His chest tightened, and his pride, so carefully nurtured over decades, began to crumble. Judge Halford's mouth opened, then closed again. Words failed him. That simple whisper, almost lost in the courtroom noise, had spoken volumes. It carried the unspoken truth, that courage and valor are not measured by loud defiance or courtroom theatrics, but by deeds done when no one is watching, in situations that demand everything and promise nothing in return. Hayes remained still, bowing his head slightly, as if he had said nothing of consequence. Yet, in that quiet gesture, he revealed everything. He did not seek recognition. He did not crave glory. He merely existed as he always had, steadfast, disciplined, and unyielding, a man shaped by fire and trials far beyond the understanding of the judge or the spectators. And for the first time, the arrogant man on the bench realized that he had underestimated something far greater than authority, the silent power of a man who had faced life-and-death decisions and emerged with unshakable integrity. The courtroom held its breath. For a long moment, Judge Halford simply stared. The gavel in his hand felt heavier than ever, as if it had suddenly transformed into a symbol of his own arrogance and ignorance. His voice, which had carried certainty and authority for decades, was gone. Words seemed useless in the face of something far greater than law, something timeless, earned in fire and shadow. The courtroom, too, was suspended in that rare, almost sacred silence. The spectators shifted uneasily, sensing that what had begun as a minor traffic violation had grown into a moment far beyond their understanding. The air seemed charged, heavy with a gravity that demanded respect. Even the bailiff, usually stoic and unmoved by courtroom theatrics, could not hide the awe in his expression. Robert Hayes, the veteran, stood quietly, head bowed slightly, holding his cap in both hands. His movements were minimal, deliberate, every gesture a reflection of a lifetime lived with discipline and honor. He had no need to raise his voice, no need to claim victory. The acknowledgement of his presence alone was enough. The court had already recognized his worth, whether anyone admitted it or not. The judge cleared his throat, but the sound was weak, trembling with a mixture of shock and shame. He had prided himself on commanding respect, yet here he was, humbled before a man he had thought powerless. Halford finally leaned back in his chair, gripping the edge of the bench as if it were the only thing anchoring him to the present. His cheeks were flushed, not with anger, but with the sting of his own ignorance. Case dismissed, he said finally, his voice faltering. The words sounded foreign even to him, lacking the authority he usually wielded so effortlessly. "You may go." Hayes nodded once, acknowledging the court without a word. There was no triumph in his gaze, only the quiet assurance of a life lived with integrity. He turned slowly and walked toward the exit, each step measured, carrying a presence that no applause could amplify. As he passed through the doorway, the courtroom exhaled collectively. The weight of his silence, the power of his experience, and the unspoken truth of his valor lingered long after he was gone. People looked at one another, eyes wide, suddenly aware of the lesson they had all just witnessed. The judge remained seated, unmoving, staring at the empty space where Hayes had stood moments before. For the first time in his career, Halford felt the bitter taste of humility. He had underestimated the quietest man in the room, and in doing so, he had learned a lesson that no amount of legal training or courtroom experience could teach. Respect is not demanded. It is earned, often in places and ways most will never see. Outside the courtroom, whispers began to spread. Spectators spoke of the old man, the veteran who had faced unimaginable trials and had carried himself with unwavering dignity. His story, though mostly untold, radiated through the air like an invisible testament to courage. Even those who had mocked him silently acknowledged the truth. Real strength is often quiet, and real valor is measured by deeds, not words. As Robert Hayes disappeared into the street, the sunlight catching the silver strands of his hair, he carried with him no prideful boast, no sense of vindication. The world had recognized him, briefly, fleetingly, but that was not why he had endured the trials of his life. He had acted then, and he walked now, with the same steady purpose that had always defined him. And in that courtroom, long after the doors had closed, one simple truth remained. The quietest men often bear the heaviest burdens, and sometimes it takes only a whisper, a single name, a call sign, a small gesture, to remind the world that true courage exists, even when it refuses to announce itself. The lesson was etched into the hearts of all who witnessed it, a memory that would outlast petty judgments and fleeting anger, that true valor commands respect, not because it demands it, but because it silently proves it.